The Spiritual Conundrum of Anxious Attachment, Leslie Wells Connection Coach. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve, repair, and connect more deeply in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. And one of the things that you will know about me if you've been following me for any length of time is that I am a Christian. For my coaching clients, I offer a science perspective if that's your preference, but most of my clients do both the faith perspective paired with the science perspective. And one of the things that's amazing is they all tie together. So you're going to learn today part of the reason why I tie attachment and faith together, because you're going to see that they are so closely intertwined. And if we do not heal our attachment style, which is the biggest predictor of how we show up in our romantic relationships, our marriage, which is is supposed to be a reflection of a testament to Jesus's love for his church and God's love for his church, attachment plays into that. And so if we don't address those things, we can't show up in godly ways, and our marriage cannot speak to the outside world. Okay, so there are two types of anxious attachment. If you are unfamiliar with attachment, go back and look at some of my other videos. I have tons of information on all the different insecure attachment styles. Anxious attachment, there are two types of anxiously attached individuals. There are the fearful avoidant who leans anxious and sort of flip-flops anxious between anxious and avoidant. And there's also the anxious preoccupied. So I'm going to speak to some things that encompass both of those different attachment styles, and there's some nuances between the two as well. One thing that we see with both in childhood, and so attachment is rooted in childhood during key attachment years between the ages of 0 and 6, but all of our serious romantic relationships also impact our attachment style, but it gets its predisposition in childhood. So if you end up in an adult relationship and all of a sudden an attachment style really sort of comes out, you already had that predisposition from your childhood experiences. One of the childhood experiences for anxiously attached individuals is intermittent reinforcement, meaning that love is given and then it is taken away, that they do not consistently get their needs met. And this can be just emotional needs. There's usually, for fearful avoidance, an element of childhood trauma. But keep in mind that intermittent reinforcement is something that's given, it's taken away. So when it's taken away and it's something that you desire and long for and it feels good to you, then it creates this anxiousness within where you want more of it, you crave more of it. And then you get it, and you sort of get that high, you sort of get that good feeling, and then it disappears again. So intermittent reinforcement in relationships pretty much shows up the same way that it does with any other addiction. When it's withdrawn away, you go into withdrawal, you want more, you'll do anything to get it back, and you sort of live for that high when you get it back. So you can already see with anxious attachment that there is this addiction that takes place. Addiction is sin, right? So these anxiously attached individuals, a lot of times, will constantly be seeking this feeling that they get when they are reconnected in their relationship, and trying to fill the void through that feeling that is really a void that only God should be filling for us. We find ourselves in sin a lot whenever we are chasing a feeling instead of pursuing God. So let's start with the anxious preoccupied. The anxious preoccupied is someone whose biggest core need, their biggest fear, is the relationship, usually their marriage or romantic relationships. So they pretty much get all of their self-worth, there's a problem there, from the relationship, and their biggest fear is being abandoned and left in the relationship. So the relationship means that to keep that relationship, they will literally become whatever their partner needs to maintain that relationship. They will become almost like a chameleon and just be whoever they need. They will become what they think their partner wants to maintain that relationship and to keep their partner. So you can see that there's so many ways that this counteracts with what God says and who we are supposed to be with God. The very first thing, and this is true of both of the anxious attachment styles, is that it's rooted in fear. And God is very clear in the Bible when he says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. So both of these attachment styles, all insecure attachment styles, are rooted in fear. So that already is a spiritual conundrum. The second thing that you'll see is that in this instance, the anxious preoccupied creates an idol out of their partner and the relationship or the marriage. A marriage is something that is to be not idolized, but it's something that we are told to steward. And so the anxious preoccupied individual is making an idol out of the partner and the relationship, which obviously is sin if you're a Christian. You're prioritizing human relationships over your relationship with God. And you're trusting that that relationship is going to sustain you rather than your relationship with God sustaining you. The other big problem with anxious preoccupied individuals is that they have no boundaries. They will let people cross over their boundaries, and they will not do anything about it. When they try to stand up to their partner and their partner says anything to sort of push back, then they will fall on the sword, they will back up, and they will fawn. They will go into a trauma response called fawn, when they will essentially say, never mind, it's on me, it's not on you. Several things are happening here. One is they're not being authentic. They are terrified to speak to their own truth, to actually say the things that they need, they want, the desire, and when they do and they get pushed back, they push it away and they back up and they don't actually stand on their truth. This is lying, this is hiding, this is being deceitful, and they're not doing this intentional. It's coming from a place of fear. However, it still means that they're not showing up authentically. They're not living in truth. That's a sin. The other problem with them not having boundaries is a lot of times they will allow people to talk them into things that go against God and His Word, especially when it comes to intimacy. There are so many anxious, preoccupied individuals that jump from one relationship to another pre-marriage and will let people test their intimate boundaries in the bedroom. And this a lot of times puts them in opposition with God's design for marriage, for intimacy, and can really get them in trouble and lead them into sin and temptation. So the fearful avoidant is driven by a betrayal wound. Not only did they have the intermittent reinforcement, they have learned that people will let them down, hurt them, disappoint them. They do not trust people can show up well for them, and they are terrified of not just being abandoned or left, but being hurt and betrayed, which means that they look at everyone through a negative lens and they catastrophize a lot to keep themselves safe. You can't be married and look at your partner constantly through a negative lens. That's not seeing them through God's eyes. That's not offering grace and mercy and compassion and empathy. It's a self-protective measure. They're not doing it intentionally. It is subconscious. However, it really is, you're not showing up in a godly way in your marriage. It's sin. You're literally looking at all of your partner's flaws, picking them apart, and they show up in terrible protest behaviors to protect themselves. Again, they don't show up authentically, speaking with vulnerability to the feelings that are really going on and the things that they're really afraid of. They show up in really bad protest ways. So love is not a feeling biblically. It is an action. It is showing up in love whether or not we feel it at the time. So when fearful avoidants go into their place of harsh words, attack, being completely critical of your partner, moving the goalposts, setting unfair expectations that they can never meet up to. All of these things are showing up in non-loving ways to your partner. They also create this push-pull in a relationship where they'll want intimacy, but then they're afraid of it, so they push their partner away. That's not showing up with love to your partner. They also make tons of assumptions about their partner. Again, you're not showing up with empathy, with compassion. You're not checking in with your partner to gain clarity. You just make assumptions and they write stories in their head. These stories are, most of the time when I work with fearful avoidance one-on-one, these stories are lies that you're telling yourself. They're lies of the enemy that you're choosing to align with and buy into. And you're making up lies in your head and writing stories about your partner that are not true. The enemy is all up in this. As far as catastrophizing, there's so many things this does. If you're always assuming worst case scenario, there's a scientific law of attraction, and what we speak demands to be fulfilled. So if you are moving every cell in your body towards something in your thoughts that are worst case scenario, you're probably going to see those things start to be true. You're also, because you're leaning everything in your decisions, your behavior towards that subconsciously, the problem with that is you're not stepping into your kingdom purpose if you're catastrophizing. You're leading yourself into a completely different way, and you're agreeing to align with the enemy by not speaking life over yourself and your marriage. You're speaking all the enemy's lies over things in your life, in your marriage, instead of speaking life. Both of these attachment styles abandon yourself. You are supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. That means you have to love yourself. You need to walk in humility, but you also need to remember that you are royalty, that you are chosen, that you are cherished, and you need to walk in that. These attachment styles do not do that. They don't walk in victory, they walk in fear. And they don't make space for themselves. If you don't make space for yourself, how are you going to step into God's calling for you? And fearful avoidants are afraid of people. You have to love people. It's part of the Great Commission. You have to go out and reach the people and talk to the people. You can't step into God's calling and your kingdom purpose if you're afraid of people. And as a former fearful avoidant leaning very anxious, totally understand that. That was a big area I had to work on. People with anxious attachment are driven by fear, not by a faith and trust in God. So you have to ask yourself, even if the worst thing happens, even if this person leaves me, abandons me, if my worst thing happens, do I believe that God is still good? Do I believe that God will get me through it and use it for His glory and my good? Are you rooted in that belief? These attachment styles, the voice of the enemy and the voice of fear is louder than the voice of God. I will be left. I will be betrayed. I am not enough. I have to earn my worth. I am not worthy. I am nothing without this person, without this relationship. If you buy into those lies, you are aligning with the enemy. That is sin. You need to turn, you need to repent, you need to rebuke that, and you need to align your thoughts with what God says. Take every thought captive. If you suffer from insecure attachment, I promise it's affecting your relationship with God and your faith.